Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Tables with your host, Rob Bradley,
John Charles Ciccarelli,
James Burrows,
and Damien Hallwood.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Tales from the Tables Roll Dark Podcast, episode 54.
Ooh, 54.
And as you can hear, we have finally returning from his epic adventure across the world, my co-host JC. JC, glad to have you back, buddy.
Good to be back. The hiatus is over, I say, and probably we'll have to miss a week coming up or something. But yes, it's good to be back. It's been a hot minute. I've been 2025, man. It's just been hitting me with a lot of illnesses. I've been sick more than I have been healthy, which is bizarre considering we're halfway through February. I feel like everybody's just kind of hit with the weird things. Plus, over here in the States, we're basically in the wasteland of culture. So it's been a wild ride. Not to get too political this early in the morning, but it's been a little bit crazy over here.
Absolutely. I can totally understand that. January is my like insulate myself month. Because at least for the last few years, it's been the month where something bad has happened. When I get ill, I get really poorly. Like I had a horrendous chest infection. One of the last Januaries, I think it was this last January gone, ended up hospitalized with it. And just for the years prior to that, all sorts of bad, nefarious stuff that's happened, either directly to me or just around me, has always been January. So January is that month where I'm like, okay, here we go. Strap in.
Yeah. January can go properly jump off a cliff. Like it's I'm so glad it's over. And I was like, February is going to be a new leaf turnover. And I'm like, no, it's just kind of like January extended so far. So hopefully March, 3 times the charm. March will be the month where it all turns around. Here's hoping. But anyway, all that being said, it's great to be back.
It's good to have you back. February for me right now feels like I'm walking down the street and I see somebody coming towards me that I think I recognize that I haven't seen in a while. I'm like, oh, that's that person. I'm going to speak to them. Oh, I didn't realize they had a W.H. Smith's here. And then I look over and that person has already walked past me and didn't notice I was there.
Yep. Oh, no.
That's February for me right now.
That sounds about right. Yep. The missed opportunities. I got that. But yeah.
Welcome back to Tales from the Tables, everyone. Whether you are returning or a new listener, welcome aboard. Tales from the Tables is a Roll Dark podcast. Roll Dark is a professional GM agency for hire, primarily based here in the UK, but available overseas as well, as you might be able to tell from the dulcet tones of my co-host here. You can head to rolldark.co.uk right now. You can tailor an ongoing campaign, join an ongoing campaign, or tailor a one-shot, birthday event, in person, online, or even join one of our sort of frequently hosted throughout the year live events that we host across, again, usually the UK here. Whatever you're looking for, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons flavored or another tabletop role-playing game, you can head there right now, find the adventure of your dreams, and roll some dice with us. That being said, we have a little bit of news this week, primarily focused around Dungeons & Dragons, once again, dominating the headlines for the most part. And then we'll dive into some tales from our tables, things we've been getting up to at the table with our players. And if you've had an incredible experience at the table, be it at home or part of a Roll Dark game, let us know. Message us on the Discord, or you can reach me at damien@rolldark.co.uk. That's DAMIEN. And you can tell us about your tales, whether that was a horrific crit fail, a glorious critical success, a shocking twist, or just the sad but exciting end to a long-standing campaign and looking forward to a new one. Whatever it is, let us know, and perhaps we'll read it out here on the podcast for you.
Exactly. Shenanigans welcome at any time.
Shenanigans always welcome.
Before we dive into the news proper, I suppose it's also appropriate to mention we should be joined by James today, but alas, he is trapped with his warlock patron, aka work, and has not been able to get out of it. So we understand the terms of his pact, and we wish him the best, and hope to see him in the next episode. And hopefully one of these days in 2025, we'll all three be reunited, which will be
Can
a
you
lot of fun.
imagine?
I can. We've done it before. We'll do it again.
We shall.
Alas.
Yes, it seems his patron has temporarily rescinded his spellcasting abilities, but
Mm.
he'll be back, I'm sure, to talk about all things D&D with us. So, there's a few items going on this last week or two, I think. JC, I'll let you
Yeah.
take the lead on this if there's something that's tickling your fancy in the stories
Oh
this last couple of weeks.
yes. So there's been a lot of chit chat and a lot of chatter on the social media channels about this upcoming live action D&D series. Now you may remember that there was an original series slated to be aired at Paramount Plus, of all places, that was based on Dungeons and Dragons. Unfortunately, it was canceled. However, we have some good news. The headline of this being Netflix resurrects Hasbro's live-action D&D series called Dungeons and Dragons: The Forgotten Realms. And the short and the long of it is, it will now be directed by Stranger Things' Sean Levy or Levy. I might be either one. I'm not sure. Sean, I apologize if you're a listener, but that's all the same. Very exciting. So now, under the Netflix banner, D&D: The Forgotten Realms will span 20 episodes, and head of television Gabriel Morano is overseeing the project, as confirmed on LinkedIn only a few days ago by Hasbro Entertainment president Oliver Dumont. Sean Levy of Stranger Things will direct, working with showrunner and writer Drew Crivello from shows like We Crashed. So this comes hot off of the heels, by the way, of last week's news that Hasbro and Legendary Entertainment have partnered to develop a live-action cinematic universe for Hasbro's other tentpole fantasy franchise, which many of you are familiar with, Magic the Gathering. It's also working on G.I. Joe and a Transformers crossover film, plus feature film adaptations of iconic board games like Clue, which excuse me, has the best film ever and never needs to be redone. So Sony and TriStar give up now before it gets worse than it needs to be. And Monopoly, which is being produced by Lionsgate, I think. So this is exciting. I don't think more D&D out there is a problem, because I'm reminded that despite its massive success and popularity and its resurgence and the fact that we live and breathe and eat it every day, there are still many people I meet on almost a weekly basis that have no idea what D&D is or what DM is. And when I told a friend who came to see my improv show that I was a dungeon master, they asked me where the dungeon I run is at. And I'm like, wouldn't you like to know? But I also play games. No, I told them that it was much nerdier than they were thinking. So yeah, let's get it out there. The epic takeover of the nerd world and D&D continues. So
It does. This
yeah.
is exciting. It is. I think I can only assume that the show that was referenced as being cancelled was the one that was to do with Dragonlance,
I
that I
think
believe
so.
had Joe Manganiello in the writing seat for.
Mm.
I can only assume that's the one they're referring to, which is, of course, a massive shame. And I know he's spoken fairly openly about his frustration about losing that, because he
Right.
was under the
Because that was
impression that,
last year, wasn't it? It was like in
yeah,
the spring last year. Yeah.
yeah, he was under the impression, and apparently had a lot of feedback, that his script was excellent. But it seems they're moving to the Forgotten Realms now. It's
Right.
entirely possible this was part of the decision making process for cancelling that show. Was perhaps they
Mm-hmm.
were already flirting with this idea. I mean, the fact that it is called the Forgotten Realms is pretty
Yep.
telling.
Yep.
Of course, if you're not aware, Forgotten Realms is generally considered the default setting for Dungeons and Dragons. It's the one that all of the official modules tend to be from, with the sort of odd exception like books like Eberron being released, which have
Mm-hmm.
their own setting. But
Or
generally,
Ravenloft.
Forgotten
Right.
Realms is the world, the campaign setting in which a lot of D&D adventures take place. It's the campaign setting that the D&D movie took place in, that we had
Mm-hmm.
not that long ago. We're in if Stranger Things has been seen to be driving people towards Dungeons and Dragons as really only a periphery to that story, is sort of a framing device for that story, Dungeons and
Right.
Dragons, then a dedicated Dungeons and Dragons show can only be a driving force to getting people to the table and playing the game.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's hoping. I still think that the movie was great and tickled all the right spots for me, at least. I know a lot of people enjoyed it. It's a shame it didn't do a little bit better than it had. I know it grossed somewhere over 200 million worldwide in 2023, which is crazy to think about that was almost 2 years ago. At
Yeah,
this, that feels like it came out 6 months ago.
it does.
It's
It
getting old.
does.
Yeah. What are some of your hopes? What is one thing you'd love to see this show either do or get right that you haven't seen before?
I my sort of my primary thing is less about character or story because, of course, much in the same way as the Fallout TV show very successfully did, it took a game which doesn't really, albeit a video game, that doesn't really have a protagonist.
Hmm.
It's very much you play you create your character and have your
True.
own story in that world as more of a sandbox. They took elements of that protagonist potential and crafted it into three separate characters. I think
Yep.
multi-character is almost a shoe-in here, that they're going to have
Hmm.
multiple lead roles in that same way to represent different classes and species in the world.
For
My
sure.
hope is more the ability to realize the world in a way that's evocative and true to the source material and the insane amount of artwork that we have of Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate being a recent example of something that sort of cross media did that extremely well. Seeing even just goblins and bugbears and wargs early doors of that game
Hmm.
in the way they look in the artwork, moving around in 3 dimensions, really well
Yep.
rendered.
Yep.
It it
Fully
just was so
voiced,
evocative, fully
fully
voiced.
characterized. Yep.
Yeah, of
Even
course.
things. Honestly, I think one of the biggest surprises to me in Baldur's Gate 3 it's very similar to your experience, Damien. The character work, the story was beautiful, the larger context of it all, but seeing certain monsters come to life for the first time, not just being something on a page, but seeing this particular company's interpretation of, say, for instance, a hook horror. I remember going into the Underdark for the first time and being like, what in the hell is that clinging to the side of the cavern? Oh my God. And then I heard it and it had this like weird, like a warbling clicking sound. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is so cool. Look how big it is, because you lose a sense of perspective on how large these creatures are when you're looking at just a piece of artwork, or even a token or a miniature on a board doesn't quite do it justice when you like see something that's still considered a medium-sized creature, but twice your size, jump down from a cliff wall and ambush your party with its weird hook arms. It's just such a cool thing. And then the bullet in the Underdark, kind of the quakes that it would cause, the foreshadowing of it. It's really a masterclass in watching your dreams come to life in ways that you couldn't even imagine. It was just I was so impressed. I started
Uh,
adding hook horrors back into my game after that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
That is exactly what I want. I want to see that world realized, and without excuse, and without we've very much gone past the era of having to change what the source material looks like to appeal
sure.
to a broader audience. Marvel very famously did it sort of with the earlier depictions of films like the X-Men being clad in black leather and
Right.
rather than, and some of the more madcap characters being stripped back to a much more human looking character rather than being as wild as they are. And now,
Right.
of course, they've completely sort of abandoned that. You see, generally, all characters now have the comic accurate costume,
Uh-huh. The
and you
yellow
have,
spandex for Wolverine. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
you have mad, wild creatures appearing on screen like Rocket
Yeah.
Raccoon and
Yep.
stuff like that. That's
Groot.
just
Hmm.
unapologetically what it is and
Yeah.
why you love it. And I'm glad that this is coming out now in an era where that's generally accepted. Like, just show it to me. What does it look like in the game?
Yep.
That's
Give
what
me
I
the
want to see
weird.
on the
Mm-hmm.
screen. If
Mm-hmm.
I want to see a beholder be a sort of 8, 9, 10 foot wide orb with multiple eyes growing out of its face and a big old
Yep.
toothy deep
Maw.
sea fish like mouth and
Yep.
just drifting out of the shadows, and get that thrill of the shock of seeing that creature appear. And B, in an era where TV very much matches both the budget and production value, if not in some cases exceeding the budget and production value of major motion pictures. They can now spend the money to make this thing look like a true Lord of the Rings-esque epic with a lived-in world and realistic depictions of creatures and monsters, and not have to worry about, folding sets and TV budgets and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, honestly, same. I think the movie, again, had done such a good job of this. It was so great to see a mimic brought to life for the first time, a displacer beast done very well.
Yeah.
Really, and with its own kind of interpretation, but the way that mechanically a displacer beast should have been represented, right? Beautifully done. Even the owlbear, just with yes, of course, that sparked a great debate of whether druids can shapeshift into monstrosities or not. But the fact that it was, had such an epic entrance and got featured a couple of times again, and then, took the red wizard and shook her to death and threw her into a building, it was great. It was beautiful to see these creatures, these iconic monsters come to life through an interpretation. That is exactly what I hope for the series as well. Like, obviously, a good story and good characterization and good actors will carry it, which I think is needed. But if there's something specific that I would like to see, I'd love to see that nerd love given to the creatures, the things that really make the franchise unique. Because anything else, any other fantasy series can have elves and orcs and dwarves. Those are staples of ever since Tolkien. But only D&D has that bizarro sort of monster, unapologetic sort of angle to it. Even something like, I know we were talking about this in the episode that I last did, which was a while back now. But I'm forgetting the name of it. The show that recently had that D&D episode on, was it Amazon? That had the one themed Secret Level, yes, thank you. That was beautifully done as well. To see a layman's tiny hut interpreted, to see different spells interpreted the way they were, to see a monk's abilities interpreted the way they were, like catching the arrow and throwing it back a la monk's deflect missiles ability. So cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
I'll deflect the question back at you with a slight polymorph. Where rather than what do you want to see, where do you want to see? The Forgotten Realms is, of course, a very broad name for this. And you could see everything from Baldur's Gate to Waterdeep to somewhere more rural like Icewind Dale, or go truly wild and head up somewhere like Chult. Where would you like to see? Where would you ideally like to see this set, or at least primarily visit?
I think that's a great question. Wow, I'm torn. I would like to see so much of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We got a little bit of Icewind Dale in the movie, didn't we? When we saw the prison. But honestly, my gut reaction was to say Waterdeep, because the City of Splendors is so unique, and it's actually the setting of the live action D&D Broadway show that they have right now, the 20-Sided Tavern, which is, they have the giant walking statues of Waterdeep. They have the castle. They have the Griffin Riders. There's so much uniqueness to that city. And it would be really cool to have like a slightly more urban focused adventure for a little while. Baldur's Gate is great. I just think it gets too much of attention, to be honest with you. Like it's a wonderful setting. It's there's a reason it's popular. But it's got that gritty fantasy vibe, and because it's a dirtier city, it's a more corrupt city. I think that's a potential for a series, but they would have to lean hardcore into it if they want to get that right, And I don't really see a D&D show, especially in the Forgotten Realms, taking itself that seriously. I don't think it's going to be a gritty Witcher-esque franchise. I think if they try, they could pull it off. And obviously, as DMs, we can tell whatever stories we want, but it would be better if it was more like the movie, I think. Something that didn't take itself too seriously, something that showed us a lot. And considering that it's called The Forgotten Realms, I think we'll be seeing a lot of different things, to be fair. The other answer I was going to give was Cormyr. I've always wanted more in Cormyr. I think it's a cool place. I think it has a very, very rich history. Unfortunately, it wasn't focused on a lot in 5th edition, but there's a lot of material for it in 3rd and 3.5. Would love to see that more fleshed out. But honestly, it's not even the locations. I would love to see specific areas. Like I want to see a true dungeon, a Lich's Crypt. I'd love to see a Netherese ruin, things like that. The very, very specific locales, an ancient elvish glade, something along those lines, an orc stronghold.
Hearing you call out Waterdeep immediately took me to, especially knowing what they're doing with Universal Studios, having Waterdeep as their sort of setting with a gigantic Xanathar puppet. I was straight
Yeah.
away transported to the characters walking into a Jabba's Palace-esque Xanathar's
Yes.
hideout
Yes.
and having to deal with that character.
Yeah,
That would
with
be
the goldfish,
very, very
Silgar
cool.
sitting on
Yeah,
top of the table and the hookah coming out in clouds. Yeah,
that
it
would
would
be
be
very
very
cool.
cool. It would be very cool.
My
Yeah.
final pondering question here, because we've hypothesized about this a fair amount, given how
Mhm.
much focus they've been given, the fact they've been up-aged a little bit and redrawn to look a bit more realistic in depiction. Do
Mm.
you think there's any possibility this is a return of those animated characters?
I sincerely hope not. I have a very particular opinion on this. So to be fair, to ward off the haters, I've actually never seen this show, and I can't really speak out of turn. Maybe it's fantastic. I've seen clips of it, enough to tell me that it's obviously very based in nostalgia, but I think it's also a very much a product of its time. And if we want this to appeal to modern audiences and see some success, it can't rely on that too hard. I think a cameo in the film is fine. It's a great little cute nod to that. That's okay. If they have it as a cameo in the show, that would be fine as well. But to focus on, the kid with the really tall pointy wizard's hat and stuff like that. These are things that I think we've moved away from in the cultural zeitgeist of fantasy and D&D in general. It's certainly how people still view those things on a basic level, but it can be so much more. And if it's being true to a story, it's really hard to not think about the movie as I'm doing this because again, the movie in my opinion did it so well. But if it really wanted to stay true to form and take itself not too seriously, but seriously enough that we can fall in love with the world, they wouldn't rely on gimmicks like that, or the nostalgia credit for that. So
Agreed.
that's in my humble opinion. At me at Discord, engagement is our juice and our flavor of life. So hit me with all the vitriol and hate that you want if you're a real big fan of the '80s series of cartoon.
I totally agree. I can only imagine, especially if Hasbro have any level of creative control over this, which I suspect they probably do have a great deal, that they will be using Baldur's Gate 3 much more as a template than they will the movie. In
Yeah,
terms of having edgy characters,
yeah.
sort of characters that are... You can always build a wild group of characters in D&D. There's always going to be an eclectic bunch of folks, but that was a particularly specific eclectic mix. They sort of
Yeah.
broadened out by having characters like Astarion in there, which generally isn't the sort of character you would have in a typical D&D game as a player character.
Yeah.
So I suspect they'll probably use that template, and I'm very excited to hear that Sean Levy's attached to this because, of course, mentioning Stranger Things, he directed what is generally considered one of the better episodes of the most recent season of Stranger Things, which, to avoid too many spoilers, I will simply describe as the Running Up the Hill episode.
I didn't realize that was his. Wow, that's
That
awesome.
was his episode, and that
Yeah,
was
it's a
a
great episode.
superb
Beautiful episode. Yeah. Truly. I mean, my favorite episode is, not to get into spoilers, but is when Eddie is at the top of the trailer playing the guitar. But that's neither here nor there. I think this comes at a really interesting time, and we'll move on to the other news in a second. But there's a lot going on in the fan and fantasy world. There's a new Avatar series that has just been kind of confirmed, and we've gotten more details about. James Bond just got picked up by Amazon and Barbara Broccoli, and it's Michael G. Wilson, I think. It's kind of taking a step back to the franchise. There's a lot happening out there. That Fallout, we're getting another season of hopefully soon. Is it this year, Damien? Do we know?
I don't know. I
I
know
need
that
it to be this
I know it's
year. It's so
shooting.
good.
I know it's shooting.
Good.
I just don't know how long that will take. I know Andor season 2 is this year.
Yes, Andor. I'm so excited for. There's so much happening in the world of nerdom. Let's keep it on a roll. It can. It's an exciting year for the nerds and for media in general. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, let's keep it on a roll. Let's
Indeed.
keep it on a critical roll.
Hey.
I'm gonna
That pun.
sidestep
That
to
segue.
this story. Talking of nerddom growing, at the time of recording, this February 21st, campaign 3 of Critical Role with Bell's Hells has concluded. The finale has finished. It was an 8-hour long epic session of finale, albeit split due to the fires over there, which they did a great job of sort of explaining and then doing charity work to help with. But that begged the question, because also in, I believe, May, they've announced Daggerheart, their own TTRPG dice system and world setting, will release. And it begged the question, is there a possibility that the folks over at Critical Role would not abandon, but step away from Dungeons and Dragons in favor of running a long-form series of Daggerheart? And it seems, in part, while there's no official confirmation, that has been in some way answered. And this comes from the fact that they have announced that there will be a grimdark Daggerheart series, a mini-series, based on the Age of Umbra, which is a campaign setting created by Matt Mercer, described as a grimdark setting inspired by the likes of Dark Souls and Kingdom Death Monster.
Nice.
Which is interesting because a lot of the artwork that I've seen from Daggerheart has been very whimsical, very bright and colourful and whimsical. It's interesting to see them go to a very dark setting with this, especially things like Dark Souls and stuff. That's really grimdark.
Yeah.
So that's surprising but exciting. The idea of Matt presumably helming something like that would be very exciting, and it'd be fun to watch. But the fact that it's a mini-series perhaps heavily implies that the main series, the main Critical Role show, will continue in the world of Exandria.
Right. I should hope so.
Yeah. I was going to ask. That was going to be my question. Were you hoping that they would focus on Daggerheart and step away from Exandria, or are you happy to see them just keep staying in that lane?
Critical Role is fascinating. I think we've never seen anything like it. I struggle to think of a franchise that has developed its own identity after coming off of the shoulders of a giant in terms of D&D, effectively being responsible for a big part of its resurgence in popularity, and then taking a hard left turn and expanding its franchise into so much other stuff, because it has massive potential. It has a great audience base, a lot of loyal fans, wonderful stories and characters, a long time running now. What, it's 10 years old? I think they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, right? From going public. Not going public, but basically airing their first few episodes back in campaign 1 of Vox Machina. Now they have so many other media styles. They have books, podcasts, YouTube series, exclusively YouTube series, comic books,
Amazon
short show segments. They have they obviously have the Amazon animation. I wouldn't be surprised if at one point they end up doing some sort of live action project. They could get away with it. They're such a massive franchise. It's no surprise to me that they developed their own RPG, especially a couple of years ago in the wake of all the criticism against Wizards of the Coast, right? And they were trying to distance themselves from that media backlash. And Daggerheart you're right. It does feel very whimsical from the artwork we've seen and the sort of style and presentation of it, very D&D-esque. So I'm excited for an Age of Umbra darker take on it. I'm here for it. You know, there were dark things happening in Exandria Unlimited, Age of Calamity. I hear that's
Incredible
making a
show.
comeback. But at the same time, I think that if they were to just alienate and get away from D&D too much, the thing that basically gives them their DNA, it would have been ultimately detrimental. So the long answer to your question is I'm excited that they're doing both. I think it's smart. I don't think that they have to focus purely on Daggerheart and let D&D and Exandria kind of fall to the wayside. I think they have the talent for it, and they're expanding their talent pool. One of the pieces of news, if you don't mind me segueing a little bit, that I was going to add was that Abria Iyengar of Critical Role fame, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting, is now back at 20-Sided Tavern as she's just finished up her run as spellcaster again, which is one of the roles in the show. And now and this has been massively popular, popping up in articles everywhere. She is now their first ever guest dungeon master, which is a huge aspect of that show. For those of you who haven't seen it, which I'll presume is most, and it's a shame because it's a terrific show. Come to New York. I'll get you comps. It'll be great. The draw of this particular show is that it's one story. So far, there's talks, I think, of perhaps adding another story at some point, but it's one story with set points in that story that occur, but everything in between those set points is decided either by the characters in the moment through their improv or by the audience themselves through their feedback and live time suggestions. So the fact that a role like the DM's has to balance both of those things, making sure you're on track to the story, hitting the right beats, still getting these NPCs introduced and moving on to the next section. And it's a very tech heavy show as well. The fact that all of that has to be balanced with a strong sense of improvisation, a great sense of story, entertainment, all of that. It's what we do as DMs, but think of it on a 2.5 hour scale. And it has to be appealing to an audience that doesn't normally play D&D, or does, and has higher expectations still. So it's a lot of pressure, and obviously I think that someone as talented as Abria is very capable of it. So it's very interesting to see a guest brought in rather than having someone trained up to that level of expertise. So going back to it, yeah, I wish Critical Role all the success in the world and all of the people that they're involved with, because they've brought us many beautiful and great stories. And let's keep Exandria alive. It's a great setting, and it's an official D&D setting now.
Yeah, I can't see them going away from it very long. It was sort of a leading question. I can't specifically see them going away from Exandria, certainly in cross media, but actually the campaign, I think the audience is so big now that even though they're an extremely loyal audience, they would be disappointed to step away from Exandria. I of course won't share any spoilers. I've seen the whole of campaign 3. Nice. I enjoyed the finale, but I'm not necessarily sure it was worth the 8-hour length, unfortunately. But that's a tiny nitpick. But I can say, sort of spoiler free, however you think it's going to end, it has significant impact on the shape of Exandria.
Ooh, interesting.
Which
okay.
I would have been very disappointing not to see a campaign post campaign 3 and how that will all shake out.
Sure.
Speaking of talent, you mentioned Calamity, which is, if you haven't seen Calamity and you're a fan of either Critical Role or Brennan Lee Mulligan, please, for goodness sake, do yourself a favor. It's 4 episodes and it's stellar.
It's stellar. It's some of the best content out there, actually.
He's returned for a closing small group of sessions called Divergence, which, if you know the setting of Exandria, is a big sort of pre all of the campaigns event, much like Calamity, a big historical event. And speaking of the talent that they've got there, I was surprised to see that one of the talents they've got in Divergence, I've seen the first episode, is Celia Rose Gooding, Grammy Award-winning Celia
Ooh,
Rose Gooding, who
no
plays
kidding.
Nyota Uhura in Star Trek: Strange New Worlds,
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
which is
Okay, that's
which is
exciting.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
really exciting.
Aren't they also a singer? Right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Grammy
Yeah.
Award-winning.
Rock on. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, wonderful,
Very
wonderful
exciting.
voice. If you don't know, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds did have a musical episode in its second season, which was fantastic. Whatever you think of that as a premise alone, as a Star Trek fan, it's better than you think it's going to be.
Amazing.
It's very, very
Yeah.
good. So yeah, really seeing more talent like that starting to come into the show. I know they've had. I know I'm burying a lot of people who've been brought to the show. In fact, I was just playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and a
Yes.
character popped up on screen who has featured in Critical Role, and I recognized him straight away.
Oh no, wait, really? Wait, who?
Yeah. So the guy,
Spoilers?
you've played Jedi Survivor?
I haven't. No, I've played the first one, and I've really been meaning to get into the second one, but my PS5 continues to not have space in it. I also continue to not have time. But anyway, yes, go ahead.
So let me see here because I don't want to get this wrong. So it's
Deborah Wilson
Noshia
is
Dalal.
back in it, right?
Noshia Dalal
Noshia Dalal
was in Critical Role in Campaign 3. I can't tell you who they played or why, because that's
Noshia
massive
Dalal.
spoilers.
Yeah. Okay.
But his face and voice cropped up in Jedi Survivor, and straight
That's
away I was like,
cool.
"Oh,
That's awesome." Yeah, see, I recognize him from Cyberpunk, actually. But
yes.
yeah, I know that he was in Critical Role as well. I love that they're bringing all these voice actors in. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very, very cool. Nice. All
All
right. Well,
right.
shall we move on to the next piece of news then?
We can, if there's something else you want to touch on. We've got a little bit of time before we should move on to Tales.
For sure. There's a quick one which is really exciting, and I kind of don't want to share it because I want it to be all for myself, but I guess I'll have to. Wizards of the Coast is hiring a D&D world builder. So this comes to us via an article published on EN World on February 10th. And I'll read you some of this because it's truly stellar. So they are, as mentioned, looking for someone to build new worlds for Dungeons and Dragons. They posted a new job listing for a senior narrative world-building designer, which will help Wizards of the Coast create exciting and inspirational new settings alongside developing existing settings. Notably, this isn't a position limited to the RPG design team. This will also work with ensuring narrative consistency across video games, entertainment, and the D&D RPG. So, in other words, it sounds like it's going to be responsible for a lot of heavy lifting with existing IP, right? Which is great. The full job listing includes things that you'll do, such as building and developing comprehensive narrative world-building materials for the D&D franchise, designing and fleshing out new worlds, locations, and settings within the D&D multiverse, evolving and expanding existing D&D settings through compelling narrative development, building and developing franchise-level characters, factions, and storylines, ensuring narrative consistency across the franchise portfolio, collaborating with cross-functional teams to align world-building elements across different media, develop detailed lore documentation and creative briefs for our fans, partners, and team members. This is built for most people I know, including myself, you, anyone at Roll Dark. Like, anybody could do this. Is it too late to apply? Damien, I'm going to let you take the rest of the podcast. I'm going to go apply to this job. All right. I'll see you guys in a bit. No, I'm kidding. I'll stick around for the end.
I mean, getting that job is that's dream
Would be
come true
something
material right there.
Yeah.
It's
I'm sure
very
it will be
exciting.
very competitive. I'm sure a
it
lot
will.
of people that will have a lot of experience going into this, and a lot of people will apply.
I would suspect it will likely end up being somebody who's already kind of very, very sort of deep in the community, albeit not necessarily directly from Wizards, but somebody who's already in that space, or certainly an established writer.
I would certainly not be surprised. Yeah.
It's exciting to see. We've mentioned this on a previous episode that it does sound like Wizards are looking to bring a new campaign setting into the revised edition of the game, which
Yeah.
is exciting because aside
That
from
is.
Exandria, which we already mentioned, it's been decades since there was a truly new campaign setting,
Mm-hmm.
and especially an official one from Wizards.
I wonder if you could have anything, what would it be? So we have so much fantasy already. We have a very standard fantasy world with things like Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, which is a little bit more swords and sorcery, but still fantasy. We have obviously Exandria being a high fantasy setting. We've got some low fantasy settings. We've got Eberron, which is more like punk noir. We've got uh, more multiverse stuff going on with Sigil in the Outlands. We've got obviously the horror campaigns with Ravenloft and the Domains of Dread. We're obviously missing Athos, but I don't think we'll ever get that back. Yeah, unfortunately. What would you want to see in a new setting?
That's a really good question, and it is something I think about a fair amount because, of course, I spend a lot of time thinking about what type of campaign I'd like to run for people, and whether that
No.
how much that would diverge from existing campaign settings, and whether I would set it in one of those or come up with one myself.
Mm,
I think it's really hard because, as you've very clearly laid out there, they've got a broad spectrum already.
yeah.
Pretty much anything you would want from the setting without just completely abandoning fantasy altogether is there already. I think I would quite like to see, and I'm sure this would not happen, but I would very much like to see a campaign setting that was really divergent from the very Tolkien-esque world that D&D's nestled in,
Mm,
and by that I mean something like um, something like Labyrinth or
okay.
uh, Dark Crystal, more
Dark Crystal. I
specifically.
think that's the world you're thinking of for
That's
sure.
what I'm
Yeah, the
thinking
Dark
of. I'm
Crystal
thinking of
world
Dark
is
Crystal
so cool. Yeah, yeah. With
because
the
it's
that could be really cool.
fantasy, but it's wholly its own fantasy with its own
Very much so. Yeah,
interesting species and things going on and
yeah. Its
setting.
own political stuff happening. Its own lore that is not very. This all relies on the One Ring.
Yeah.
Despite it being called the Dark Crystal.
One of my
Yeah.
favorite and this isn't, well, it is sort of, it's fantasy meets almost modern / sci-fi in a way.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to pin down, but is the Oddworld franchise
Yeah.
on originally on PlayStation with Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus, where you have this hyper industrialized sort of meat processing factory with these almost illithid-esque creatures with big squid-like heads just dominating the world of commerce with their factories. But then you have the Mudokons, who are these deeply spiritual sort of native race from the wilds who use sort of wild druidic magic and have lives steeped in tradition and ancient tombs and sort of venerate the moon of the world. I think a setting like that could be really fun too.
That sounds like super
Again,
fun.
something that is a really big step away from everything that we have.
Right. Right. A big turn. Yeah. I think that could be very interesting. I've always been interested to see, and I think this is partially something that could have worked well in a Dark Sun setting, but I don't think we'll ever, like I said, we'll never get that back. And in some respects, it's probably a better thing. But I would be very interested to see more of a frontier based setting. So specifically, what I mean by that is like a sort of uncharted world setting. I think we fall into narrative staples with things like, oh, you all meet at the tavern where everything's established and the realm has a currency and there's lots of and that works very well for many settings. I think a lot of people need that little touch of reality to help ground them in a fantasy world, right? The fact that they can order a drink at a bar or a pub is their gate into the weirder and wilder stuff, right? So, okay, they can fight this bizarre monster that has 10 eye stalks and a big toothy maw, but they can always go back to the tavern and order a pint. That's their touchstone. But me, I'm like, Screw you and your comfort. I want you to be in the wilds, in the weird, in the frontier. There is no established monarchy. There is like this is uncharted territory. It's a strange new world, to bring it back to what you said. This is what we were talking about earlier. There's no safe haven. You have to maybe it's even got a little bit of development on that front. Like maybe there we get a little bit of a not a system per se, but a mechanic for helping basically start up forward base camps or marking sites for later development and bringing in resources to new places. It not to get too resource management heavy, because I don't think that D&D is that type of game, and I don't think it does well when people try to shoehorn those mechanics into it, but it could be interesting to see to really feel like you're exploring an area that's never been explored before, and you're in out of your depth. You don't have any elements. And it can get weird and wild with it too. It doesn't have to be just elven ruins in a forest, right? It could be uh, a different planet, a different sort of civilization that you're getting to experience for the first time, or the remnants of an older one. It could, and with it, what I would really be hoping for here is the introduction of a whole bunch of new monsters and a bunch of new creatures or inhabitants that you get to meet. And so that would bring a bevy of just fresh life into the game. That's what I would really love to see. That
That's
or super grimdark a la
yeah,
Dark Souls.
yeah, yeah. Something Bloodborne-esque would be very,
Something
very
Bloodborne-esque.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, a great
Ugh,
oozingly dripping world of lore and gothic horror
yeah,
and Lovecraftian horror, very
yeah,
much so.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm already imagining a group of refugee survivors from a dying world just stepping through the only available portal they have to another world that seems uninhabited,
Hmm.
and just appearing on that world with whatever they could carry, and just
Right.
having to plant a flag in the ground and go, right, this is it. This is where we are
Yep.
now.
Let's push forward and see what we find here, you know?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
That could be
Would love
really
that.
rich. Yeah, that would be really
Yeah.
cool.
Very cool. Well, does that take us to the end of the news?
I think it does. I think it
All right.
does.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to our Tales from the Table segments then. Damon, you got something to kick us off?
Indeed. So yeah, I've had a fun few weeks of D&D. I've got a campaign of Odyssey of the Dragonlords on a Monday night, which is reaching some pretty deep narrative heights in terms of the main story.
Yeah.
It's an interesting book. Without going into spoilers, the book has an unusual sort of narrative shift towards the later chapters of the book, where the primary quest and the primary antagonists are assumed to be dealt with before
Hmm.
the final chapter of the book. And then there's 3 or 4 chapters after that, which opens up a whole new way to experience the campaign post those events, which you don't see very often. Usually
No,
a
you
campaign
don't.
takes you to the end narratively where it sets itself up, and it doesn't
Right.
really do that. It branches off a little bit. We're coming to the first sort of narrative break conclusion. The story is concluding with a massive siege of and defense of the sort of capital city of that world called Mitros. And it's
Wow.
about to be invaded by an army of minotaurs, centaurs,
Ooh.
cyclopes, giants, and the children of titans.
Nice.
And they are invading because the Oath of Peace, the sort of big crux of the story, is that an Oath of Peace was put together by both gods and titans to stop the conflict for 500 years.
Mm,
And the last day of a 500-year era of peace just ticked over at the end of our last session.
right.
It comes with some big narrative twists as well, which some of my players had already sort of theorized was going to be the case and had confirmed, which was fun to see them hypothesizing about that. So some big narrative twists coming as well. It's all reaching ahead, and we're now preparing for this sort of multi-stage I want to say almost Helm's Deep-esque sort of,
Yes.
but on a city scale rather than a sort
That's
of a Bastion scale.
beautiful. Oh, that's awesome.
Uh,
Tell us how that goes. Keep us posted on that because that
I
sounds like a lot of
will.
fun.
I will. And it's been a joy running this campaign for the folks. They've really thrown themselves into deep character expression and sort of rolling with narrative arcs, both success and failure, and some of the big surprises of the campaign coming from unexpected sort of story twists for their characters. It's been a joy, and I'm making it sound like it's ending. It still has a way to go.
Yeah, sure, right.
But certainly a sort of the big thing that brought these characters together was this moment, was
Right.
the fact that this oath would end, and it would bring forth an invasion of entities who are native to the lands of Thylea, who are seeking to roll over it and claim it all back in the name of the Titans.
Right.
They had a battle against one of the Titans in a massive tower.
Ooh.
Which
How did that go?
It was a lot of fun.
Okay.
The Titan rolled really, really bad in initiative, like really, really bad.
Oh,
and
no.
they are an extremely tight unit as a group of
Hmm.
players. They are very accomplished. They know each other's abilities. They know their own abilities, and they can crowd control like the best of them, and they can bring down a big monster by just unleashing an ungodly amount of damage in a single turn
Yeah.
of combat. So yeah, they handled it pretty well, and ended up destroying the tower, a la the end of Lord of the Rings, with the tower sort of exploding and falling as they flew away from it, watching it fall into the sea.
Wow. Very cool. That sounds amazing.
It's a very, very epic campaign, and but it's a dense campaign. There's so much. I know James is running it, and I know he's early doors with it and is enjoying it. It's so dense. There's so much going on. There's so many characters. There's so much potential for narrative, like deep narrative for each player, rather than the whole group, which also is possible too. And so much history and lore. It feels like a Greek epic, which is the best review I can give it because that's its inspiration.
That is honestly a pretty great review of it. Honestly, I've heard so many great things about it. I'm tempted to try and run it myself, but it's a commitment, like any campaign, right? It would be a couple of years, so I don't know, maybe somewhere down the line. Very cool. Very cool. How many more Titans do they have left to face at this point?
So they have faced and defeated the two primary Titans.
Ah, nice. Wow.
But they will not be the only Titans they will face.
Ah, very cool. I hope you're listening, Damien's players.
They pretty much know what they're up against, with some exceptions. They know what they're up against, so
cool.
Yeah, not too many surprises in terms of what they have to face now. It's just the beautiful thing about it is they've gathered so many NPCs and made so many friends and rescued so many people from islands across Thylea that have been brought back to Mitros, that the city is now a crammed to the corners bag of holding of NPCs they don't want to lose.
Jeez.
So
that's awesome.
The stakes for that city are so high because everyone they know, everyone they've met is there.
That's crazy. Yeah, there you go. Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow that. Jesus. I don't know. What tales do I tell from my tables that could possibly compare to something so epic and huge in scope? I don't know. I don't know what else I have to share. I will say that my home Curse of Strahd game this is my fourth time running, is finally in Ravenloft. And it started with someone falling through a bridge, which is probably has never happened before. And I finally rolled the right number on a D100 for that to happen to someone randomly as they just effectively charged right across the bridge. And it was just They didn't die or anything. There was somebody who had fly that could swoop down and get them at the bottom of the 1,000-foot drop. But it's so narratively satisfying sometimes to, after a very heavy couple of big combat sessions and many deep RP things that have been happening with people's characters being reinvented and forgiven for crimes and reaching certain apotheoses and the culmination of months and months and months of hard work and artifact searching and lots of dilemmas and all of this moral quandary, to have something simple like a guy fall through a bridge because he was not being too careful is hilarious, and was just, I think, a bit of the reprieve needed in a story right before the ominous, humongous structure that Ravenloft is. Just to have a little bit of a, haha, you thought you were safe, but you're not, just for a moment. And
Yeah.
it was not even like a, haha, I'm the DM and you got hurt moment. It was because I don't really take that much. So every now and then some people deserve it, but hey, some characters deserve it, I should say. But more in the sense of like, this is a basic and a simple thing that is easily recognizable and accessible to a lot of people. It is a mundane physical trap. It's not weird. It's not supernatural. It's not magical. It's just something that you have to be ready for when you're exploring a castle ruin. And there's something classic D&D about that. Just a falling pit trap or a rickety bridge or something along those lines that felt very narratively satisfying. I know it's nowhere near as epic as your tale, but I was just like, there's beauty in the simplicity too. Okay.
There is. I've
Yeah.
had in my Tuesday night game, which is Vecna Eve of Ruin,
Mhm.
we had a very accomplished sort of monk rogue multi-class fall into a pit trap.
Yep.
It wasn't something that was going to kill the character.
Nope.
But the narrative that came out of, because they were invisible as well at the time, the narrative that came out of the fall of pride from a character that has huge dex, incredibly
Sure.
perceptive, is sort of the rogue of the group, is the one that goes forward looking for traps and dismantling doors and so on and so forth, falling into a pit trap and just getting out of it and continuing to walk onwards, just brushing off like, that was, we're never talking about that ever again.
Never again. Yep. It's
Wonderfully
beautiful.
simple, but like you say, so classic D&D.
Yes.
And this is kind of to segue away from that a little bit, sort of a tale from the table. I'm still trying to very much avoid spoilers for Eve of Ruin, because I know that certainly I've run it close to from when it launched, and so I imagine a lot of people still will be, and so I don't want to
Right.
go into too many spoilers. But that is to say, they're in a location right now where one of the players, God bless them, and this, I have a player like this in my home campaign as well, who just needed to touch the thing. They knew that they probably shouldn't touch the thing.
Mhm.
And everybody in the group was like, don't touch the thing.
Don't touch the thing.
But they needed to touch the thing. And this is my DM plea to any players out there listening. Do not be afraid to touch the thing.
Touch the thing.
Somebody in my Tomb of Annihilation campaign came across an item which is just a gold skull on a pedestal. And they touched the thing. And reading that in my preparation for that section of the book, which is the tomb at the titular tomb of the Tomb of Annihilation, just deadly. I read that room, that map room, and thought, that's so cool, but there's no way that anyone's going to touch that thing. Nobody's going to do the thing. There's such a wasted moment, because I've got so many good ideas for it, but I know nobody's going to touch the thing.
That's the thing.
And somebody did, and it led to some of the most frequently referenced sequences that still get brought up years later from that encounter. And this particular instance led to an encounter with a particularly harrowing foe that ordinarily they wouldn't have faced had they not touched the thing. So don't be afraid as a player to just go and press the big red button. So yes, can it be deadly? Sure it can. But ideally you should know that based on the type of campaign you're running. So you should know what you're getting into if that's the case.
100%.
If you're not running a deadly campaign, then chances are, even though it might be detrimental, your GM is sitting on something super cool and can do a lot with it if you just go over and hit that big red button for them.
Yes, indeed. We have a lot of surprises and fun things that we never get to pull the trigger on because people are too careful. Just go do the thing. Lean into the chaos is what I always say.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Don't
excellent.
be too reckless with it. Don't try and get your characters and you get killed.
Sure.
But just,
there's a difference.
If there's a thing and it's there, and just touch it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a cursed magical item, and you're going to end up with something you can talk to and a way to role play with your characters that's going to be a narratively interesting way for them to try and help you. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's not. Just touch the thing, please.
I have a.
If you're just joining the podcast right now,
just go touch the thing. That's all you need to know. That's actually the name of this episode. Is just please touch the thing.
That's done.
Done.
Nailed it.
Oh gosh. Oh no. I'm losing the track of what I was going to add to this. Oh no, I had a really good follow up to this one. Damn it! I lost it. It'll come back to me. But yes, go touch the thing. I think I was just excited to say that a lot.
You agree? It sounds like
I do. I'm thinking about what other stories I can share. We were talking about Vecna Eve of Ruin. My Vecna Eve of Ruin players are much earlier in the story, but that's because I've injected it all into it's gone way off the rails in terms of it. We're finally starting to get closer back to some of the actual written content, but I added a lot in the beginning to try and flesh it out a little bit more. I'm really excited because they've just delved down into the layer of a hag. And guess what's arrived just in time for my hag encounter? That's right, the new monster manual with the Archhag stat block. I'm really excited for it. They've already started a battle, and the beauty of this particular hag that I've come up with, I think I've talked about her before. She's one who harvests faces from her victims, which she then has masks, right? So the best thing about this was they faced her in combat. They found her in her lair. She was doing some grisly work on a corpse. They immediately started blasting off all these powerful spells. She started answering in kind. The fighters got right in there. A tough battle, but it was still over relatively quick. 3 rounds. And as they all perfectly lined up to go look at the body and start seeing if there was anything of valuable loot, the child that they had been protecting this whole time from the hag that had been hiding in her lair was behind them and was just so scared and was covering her face and started crying, which turned into laughter as she tore off the mask that she was wearing and the illusion dispelled, and the real hag who was behind them. They had just killed their simulacrum. That's why they went over and they were like, why is her blood just water and why is there an icy puddle on the floor? It was because it was a simulacrum. And she had so many great AoE spells to kind of kick off combat with this surprise, but they were so perfectly in a line. I think I got like 5 out of 6 of them in a line. And I was like, I have to do this with a lightning bolt. There's never going to be another opportunity to get a perfect lightning bolt cast through them. So it was a lightning bolt that opened up phase 2 of the combat, which they ultimately were also successful in, despite it costing them a lot. So it was a lot of fun. Is it the end of this hag? Who knows? Maybe she's got more surprises, even though she's, as for all intents and purposes, dead. But they're moving on from this area back to Sigil, which is exciting. And then from there, they're going on their multi-realm epic quest to, spoilers notwithstanding, I won't get into it here, but to basically stop Vecna because it's in the title, right?
Yeah.
So that's okay. So I'm very excited for that. And yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Very cool. I know I'll bring this to the table real quick because I know you've shown an interest in hearing how this is going. Fallout.
Other tell us Fallout.
Home campaigns that are going on. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to the previous episodes, but
one
of our most recent encounters ended up with the Mr. Handy on the back of a Deathclaw trying to rein it in. Chaos and shenanigans abound. But what's going on right now is a pretty cool. So I've said before, it's a published campaign that I'm running, which
Okay.
is Winter of Atom,
Yes.
and it's set in the Commonwealth of Fallout 4. But there is some interesting, unique settlements and locations in the book that you will not see in the video game, which is a great. Always, that's what you want. You don't want it to
Right.
be a complete carbon copy of the video game.
Correct.
Aside from the fact it's set in a horrendous nuclear winter, which adds a flavor to it, it also has some cool places you can visit that you will not see, and of course surprise your players with if you're running the game. And the one that they've got to just now, so spoilers in a way for the campaign, spoilers for a location that I think is really cool if you don't know it's coming and you don't know anything about the campaign and you're planning on being in it. So spoilers in that regard. But they've just come to a place called Mirage.
Ooh.
And Mirage is a rolling tower block lit up like a Christmas tree on wheels being pulled by a herd of Brahmin.
That's so cool.
And inside Mirage is, as you would expect from a Mirage, a paradise. There is gambling halls and entertainment, food and drink, and it has rules. Nobody spends more than 72 hours there. You must be spending caps to stay. All weapons checked at the door. What happens in Mirage stays in Mirage. These are the sort of rules that you must abide by to visit Mirage. And they have a reason to be there, which I won't get into because that is story spoilers, but they have a reason to be there. And so they've been enjoying gambling. They've been enjoying drinking and meeting some of the NPCs in there, finding out the origin of Mirage and where it came from, which is an interesting sort of origin that doesn't cover too much in the book that you can extrapolate into something sort of wider and broader, but the nugget is there for a really interesting seed of where Mirage came from. But of course, it's in the name. Yes, it's a paradise, but
it's
it is
all
also
an
a
illusion.
mirage.
Yeah.
There is stuff going on in the background that they are trying to deal with that is frankly abhorrent. There is some really, really grim stuff happening at Mirage that sort of keeps the veneer shiny and bright for people to come and be part of, and it links to the main story as well. And so the players have just got into the hot water of delving down into the bowels of Mirage to deal with the grim stuff after having a lot of fun gambling and drinking and dancing and celebrating in the beautiful halls and the well-appointed gambling dens and so forth. So that's just a really cool place, a really cool setting that you could lift out of any Fallout setting and put it in another. You could put this anywhere, and it would still work. It would still function. You just have to tie the story in a different way. But Mirage, if you want to use it, it's in Winter of Atom. If you're not planning on running that campaign but are planning on running Fallout, I know that slight news segment. I just read that Modifius is soon to be releasing a new campaign setting set out in New Vegas.
Oh, no way. Oh,
So
that's exciting.
That thing is going to sell gangbusters, I'm sure.
Yeah, it will.
It's a very popular campaign setting. So if you plan on running that, but you want a cool and very on-brand, I think, Mirage for New Vegas, being a sort of rolling paradise gambling hall emporium.
Oh, yeah.
Totally on brand for that. So
reminds me a lot of Mahadi from Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, Mahadi's Emporium.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's just it's a traveling stall. There's basically there's gambling halls. There's like a fine restaurant there as well. There's all kinds of like shops and a marketplace. It's effectively a bazaar, right? It's the what do they call it? I forget. Is it the Rolling Bazaar or something like that?
I think it's Rolling Emporium, right? Is it
the Rolling? Yeah, Mahadi's something Emporium, Wandering Emporium, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
So cool. Reminds me of that, and it reminds me of the fact that I took the Prince Ali song from Aladdin and I called it Mahadi's Emporium, which was the great intro to how they encountered that in Avernus. It was a lot of fun.
It's not a bad comparison because they very quickly realized when they got there and started ordering drinks and so forth, the proprietor basically ordered the drink and said, "Yeah, okay, I'll put that on your tab." And they're like, "Oh."
Uh-huh.
Oh no.
We have a tab, do we?
At no point did they tell them how much the drink cost. At
Mhm.
no point did they give them any kind of idea of how much food and drink cost there. They just said, okay, great, I'll put that on your tab.
Put that on the tab.
So they very quickly realized we have to be a little bit careful here how much we spend, because they're not going to tell us until the end of the day how much we've racked up.
It's one of those places.
Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Well, very cool stuff, and I'm very excited to see where it goes, but I think that brings us to the end for today, doesn't it?
I think it does. Yeah, that's the end of my
right.
tales, if it is the end of yours.
Yeah, I have many, many more, but they can be shared in many future episodes, which I hope to be around for. So
Of course. And as I've said before, if you're listening and you've got a tale from the table that you want to share, please do. Please do reach out to us. We will endeavor to get that read out for you and share your adventure with the world.
Yeah, we're eager to hear stories from you. Very much
we'd love
so.
to.
Please,
We'd love
please
to hear
do
your
share.
tales.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say earlier, Damien, with the touch the thing. Wait, this is very important. Last thing I'll say. There is a
Post-credit
wonderful
scene.
yes, yeah. There's a wonderful video game out there, which if you haven't played it and you're into very cerebral sort of gameplay, go check it out. It's called Disco Elysium. I think I've talked about it here before because one of my teens that I run a long-standing campaign for called Wayfinder wanted last year to run a game in that setting, and he walked away with a magic item, which is an item that appears in the game proper, called the Horrific Necktie. And if you're familiar with the game at all, the Horrific Necktie, I think is basically the only item that we crossed over back into the main campaign after we had this sort of separate and apart, effectively a one-shot set in the Disco Elysium world. But the Horrific Necktie basically is full of bad ideas and encourages you to do very stupid and wild things and kind of act on impulse because it basically talks to you while you wear it. It's effectively, in D&D terms, it would be like a sentient magic item that has its own personality. So that's effectively what I made it, a sentient item that can't be removed by any means and encourages you to go for broke effectively and do crazy stuff and touch the big red button and do the thing. But the mechanics I built around it are, it will encourage you to do crazy things, but it often has negative consequences. So you have to roll a d20 and a roll of 5 or below. It's a penalty to your roll instead. And you have to make a wisdom saving throw because it might try to take over your personality at times to encourage you to basically cast the command or the suggestion spell on you to do certain things, which has been so much fun to play with. And every time I'm reminded that he's still wearing it, that the character is still wearing it, I'm like, yeah, the Horrific Necktie. Make a wisdom saving throw. He's going to force you to walk into this, or it's going to force you to walk into this part of the room that you probably shouldn't. You know, you're like, oh, just see what happens when you step on that tile. Come on, that sort of thing.
Amazing.
A lot of fun. But thank you for letting me get that in there, squeezing it in. We'll hopefully see you at the next Tales from the Tables.
Indeed. We'll see you next time, and players, just touch the thing.
Just touch the thing. Good night, everybody.